I love going to church on Mother's Day. With a few exceptions, every church service I've attended on Mother's Day has been a beautiful celebration of motherhood where mothers are thanked and praised for their service and kindness and dedication. Verses of the Bible are read that exalt mothers. For example, Proverbs 31 and Ezekiel 19 verse 2. Mary's example as a mother to Jesus is pointed out, and mothers in the congregation are compared favorably to her. Depending on the church, Monica, the mother of St. Augustine, or Susanna, the mother of the Wesley brothers, will be brought up as excellent examples of mothers who have raised children that changed the course of theological study. It is almost without fail the heartwarming celebration of our mothers that our mothers deserve. I didn't grow up in the church. My father was raised as a Jehovah's Witness and was distrustful of organized religion until my teenage years. I did grow up reading my Bible, though. I grew up reading both good and bad examples of fatherhood in the Bible. Job prayed for his children. David helped Solomon get the temple started. Joseph raised his sons well. These are counterbalanced with Jacob's choosing favorites and Jephthah giving up his daughter to win a battle. When I started attending church as an adult, I remember the first Father's Day sermon I attended. I wasn't a father at the time, but I have a fantastic father. So when statistics about how many deadbeat dads that don't even pay child support were brought up, that felt out of place. I wasn't celebrating Father's Day to celebrate deadbeat dads. I was celebrating Father's Day to celebrate my own excellent father. After church, when I expressed these concerns, I was told that we can't get too excited about good fathers because it will make those that have deadbeat dads feel bad. This mirrors an attitude that I've encountered all around regarding Father's Day, that the idea of offending those who have deadbeat dads by pointing out that there are good fathers is an evil comparable to directly insulting them. After all, it turns out that my relationship with my father and my desire to celebrate my father is really all about them. Over the next decade, I attended several churches. I was in church on Father's Day most often, just because Father's Day is a Sunday holiday, and I made a habit of being in church on Sundays. Father's Day was the first crack in my desire to attend church regularly. I got sick and tired of hearing Father's Day sermons about how horrible fathers can be. Sure, there's usually a portion at the beginning where the fathers present are celebrated, but when the sermon started it was usually peppered with warnings about not letting ourselves become deadbeat dads. Then, when I met the woman who would become my wife, her and I shared a trait that would be something we bonded over. We both had birthdays that would periodically coincide with a floating holiday. Mine is Thanksgiving. Hers is Father's Day. She didn't like going to church on Father's Day, partly because she was estranged from her father, and partly because she was usually celebrating her birthday that weekend. I didn't need much convincing. Just over 18 years ago, we had a child and I became a father. Our first child is developmentally disabled. He grew slowly. He matured slowly. He struggled to eat, to crawl, and to talk. While we would find out 5 years later that this was the result of a genetic condition, during the early years of his development accusations flew fast and far that my wife and I were not taking care of him, and our abuse and neglect was the reason he developed slowly. This hit both of us hard. For his first 2 years of life, I was working a job that was a 2-hour drive away. I would wake up, shower and eat, drive to work 8 hours, drive home, take over with our son for 6 hours so my wife could rest, then sleep for 4.5 hours just to do it all again the next day. Our son had to eat every 2 hours, 24 hours a day. It took a half an hour to feed him, half an hour to clean up after, and then half an hour to prepare his specialty formula. Regular formula didn't have enough calories to keep him alive. That left half an hour to settle between feedings, and we couldn't put our son down or he would stop breathing. He was our first child, and we didn't realize that this was unusual. So when the criticism came that the reason our son wasn't developing normally was because I was neglectful, I took it to heart. Evidence of my neglect was easy to point to. I would come home Friday night, take our son for 8 hours instead of the normal 6, and then sleep for 12 to 14 hours all day Saturday. I felt so weak and like such a failure. Everyone else was able to take care of their kids all week and still make time to play on Saturday. Why couldn't I? Worst of all, this was, according to our church family, most likely the reason that our son was struggling. Being a father, I felt a renewed need to set an example by attending church every Sunday. This included Father's Day. Father's Day sermons hadn't changed. The difference was that now, after the sermon, I had people coming up to me after and saying, "Did you hear the sermon today? Are you starting to see how important it is that you start being there for your wife and son? You can't just leave them abandoned all the time." Anything I tried to say to defend myself was dismissed as an excuse. By the time our son was 4, things were starting to settle down a little. He was down to 6 or 7 feedings per day, which allowed us to sleep overnight. It was still a struggle to keep up with his therapy and doctor appointments and everything else, but my job was closer, and we had some family support. His skin was sensitive to some laundry detergents. He was still on a mostly liquid diet and needed someone to hold his bottle for him, and his feet were shaped strangely enough to warrant braces. Still, the accusations came. If we would just push him harder, he would hold his own bottle. Or at least, that's what our accusers assured us. If we really worked with him, he would walk without braces. If we really worked with him, he would sleep through the night. If we really worked with him, he would be fine. All of this, they assured us, was because we were bad parents. Mother's Day would come and go exactly like every other Sunday, and we would often get a 1-week reprieve as my wife's contributions were celebrated. In contrast, every Father's Day sermon provided ammunition to my accusers. When our oldest was 5, we had, and then lost our second child. In the process, a more advanced genetic test became available, and we learned that both our sons had a rare genetic condition called Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome. And the reason that both of our sons had this condition was because I, their father, am a carrier. This did not silence our accusers. In fact, it gave the more ignorant among them more fuel. "Oh, it's because you did drugs. It's because you lived a rock and roll lifestyle. It's because you never took care of yourself." That's not how genetics works, and I know that, but it's wearing. And it gave the accusers a dedicated target. I was the source, it was my fault, I was the carrier, I must be the sinner. And every Father's Day, they would get more ammunition during the sermon. Mental health is a complicated subject, and there is no one single point that leads to a decision. Along with accusations of being a bad father, there were other accusations which are beyond the scope of today's post. I saw myself as a failure as a father and a husband, but because of the extra effort my son took, there wasn't anything else in my life except being a father and a husband. This had been my reality for 16 years, through 3 main churches and a dozen or so intermittent churches, and 5 jobs. No matter what else changed, this was my daily reality, and there was no hope that it would ever change. So on July 10th of 2017, I tried to take my own life. I never found therapy helpful. There was a certain kind of self-contradiction that I experienced with the advice I got in therapy. For example, a therapist would tell me, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to." Then, when I told my therapist that I was refusing to move out of my parents' house and back into our home like my wife wanted, I would be told, "But you need to compromise." When I would ask how giving in and only doing what my wife wanted and never doing things my way was a compromise, I would hear, "Certainly your wife is doing some things your way." So I'd ask for examples and would be told, "I'm not there with you all the time. What I want you to do is think about this and try to keep track of all the times this month that your wife does things your way. Make a list. So the next month, I would turn in an empty sheet of paper and be told that I did the assignment wrong. I never found a therapist that made me feel heard. I became rather bitter for a while. In my bitterness, I made it a point to avoid church the next few Father's Days. Avoiding Father's Day sermons actually helped a little, so I made attending church a lower priority. At this point, I make attending church a lower priority than trying to keep up with my favorite television shows, and I'm 2 seasons behind on some of my favorite television shows. In 2019, my church asked me to step in as treasurer, and I agreed. I thought it might help me rekindle some of my dedication to church. When I'm at church, I'm very guarded. I hope being treasurer would help me feel connected to the people I go to church with. Being treasurer had exactly the opposite effect. When our church moved online due to COVID closures, I never watched a sermon online. I never felt like I connected with the rest of the finance team and fell further and further away from the pastor. The only times I've contemplated suicide since 2017 were twice when I was acting as treasurer. Although my wife still attends there, I make the effort to avoid the pastor and finance chair to whatever degree is prudent when I'm present on site. I still find the sight of them, even in public, to be triggering. Tomorrow will be Father's Day. I'll be with my father. I won't be at church. I have learned that Father's Day sermons are where my enemies go to get ammunition to use against me. I've learned that there's no one at church that will come to my defense when I need them. I've learned that this isn't a problem with just one church, but a systemic problem in church in general, at least within distance to be relevant to me. Once when I was explaining this to a pastor, the pastor asked, "If someone is getting between you and God, who is closer to God?" Anyone who reads my blog can tell that these people aren't coming between me and God. They're coming between me and church. And if the church coming between me and church instead causes me to get closer to God, my family, and my kids, I think this reflects poorly on the institution of the church, at least on Father's Day.